Hello everybody, Jose Rodriguez here. The last video we were talking about whether we should flush or not and the ins and outs about the flushing of these cartridges. We're talking about sponge type cartridges for Canon printers. And it just depends. It depends on what you want. There are many answers and many approaches to this. Some are very difficult and some are just easy as pie. All you got to do is spend a little money. All right, but this time we're going to talk about how did we develop these refilling methods for these types of cartridges? When original Canon printers were using similar type cartridges like this CLI-8, they did not have chips. So simply, you can just drill a hole like this one here. This was actually done quite wrong by someone. You drill a hole big enough for a needle to pass through. You fill up the liquid chamber. You take a hot glue gun and you apply some hot glue there to seal that hole. It could be a very small hole, maybe 1/16 of an inch diameter, and you're set to go. You would pop that back into the printer, assuming, of course, you have good ink flow, and the printer would see it as full, again, because you removed it. It's funny, that's the way it used to work. Well, then they introduced chips. The cartridge structure was basically still the same, but now we have a problem that when the cartridge is declared empty, we had no way to reset it back to full. So people were simply disabling ink monitoring. And that was a problem because you had to constantly check your cartridge levels. And when you remove one to check and you pop it back in, you say, oh, I have sufficient ink. You pop it back in, it's going to then create a purge cycle. Yes, it would purge ink out of all the cartridges, including the one that you just popped in. You still have no ink monitoring, so you have no clue what's going on. So the idea was, of course, back then was to just, when one of them was relatively low, like maybe this level here, top them all off and continue printing. Because you had no ink monitoring, it didn't really matter. You just top all of them off and continue printing. Now, every time you did that, you had to remove that glob of hot glue and then apply some more hot glue or aluminum tape. That sealed it pretty well, but again, you had to replace that every single time you refilled it. Now, somebody came up with the bright idea of using a plug. So they started to experiment. Hey, what plugs are available in the market of this refilling world? And it wasn't really that popular a world back then. We had some really strange cartridges that were like tricolor, maybe 5-color in one single cartridge body. You did not have individual cartridges like we see them now. So they figured out that a specific type of plug worked really well if you drill a 5/32 inch diameter hole. That's what they did here. And that allowed you to then attach a plug that can be easily removed and facilitate your refilling process a lot more than having to remove that glob of hot glue or the tape and whatever. So that stayed that way for quite a while, okay? And people were having lots of ink flow problems because we really didn't know the ins and outs of performing this refilling process as efficiently as possible. We now know how to do it, okay? So what was the next step? Well, the brilliant folks in Germany developed a method that was really strange. I never adopted it because I really did not believe in it. It called for drilling a hole right here, believe it or not, yes. Drilling a hole right here through that wall, inserting a blunt needle under the sponge. And be aware that the exit port is part of that bottom sponge. So I don't know how they did that. And basically, you push that needle all the way through until it emerged through that little intake hole that's located in this wall right here between the liquid chamber and the sponge chamber. There is a hole that allows ink to enter and saturate the bottom of your sponge as you are drawing ink. You create a deficit, and the deficit is replaced or replenished by the ink located in the liquid chamber. Well, so you stick a needle all the way in and you fill the liquid chamber like that. And once it is full, you remove the needle. And then you didn't plug that hole either. And people were having leakage. Of course they had leakage. I don't know. Anyway, so there was quite a war between the top fillers and the German method fillers. And that was never really, nobody really won that one. So as this method started to sort of disappear, we still had the problem of resetting our chips. Everybody was still drilling that hole until somebody figured out, hey, wait a minute, what is this? What is this little indentation right here? They realized that there was a ball in there that the factory would install to seal the cartridge before they applied this label on top. This is what actually would create a total seal, okay? So they took an X-Acto blade or a number 11 scalpel blade and scored around it, and then they saw the ball. It was sitting right there, and they would insert something pointy and pry that ball out. The problem was that the bottom of that cavity, that little cylindrical cavity, had like a seat, a spherical seat, to allow the ball to sit there and simply rotate as it needed to. You couldn't really put a plug through that. It would only go that far, and it would not seal very well. So they measured the inner diameter of that hole and figured out that it was bigger than 5/32 of an inch. So, so if we continue using that drill size, because it's a perfect diameter hole to seal these plugs, these are silicone plugs, drill out that seat. Now, that still created a situation where the inner diameter of that cylindrical hole was larger, slightly larger than the hole we were creating through that seat. That allowed this plug to enter, and it reaches that seat, which still has a smaller hole, and you press it through it. It's going to cause that end of that plug to compress. And then as it emerges past that, it re-expands. Perfect seal. Okay, why do you need a perfect seal? Because otherwise, ink will just pour out of your cartridge. This prevents that ink from pouring out when you're not actually printing. Okay, so that was dandy. That was perfect. And so that's what most of us were adopting, during our refilling adventures with these types of cartridges. All right. Still, we have no way to reset these. Then the Chinese came with single-use chips. And we said, awesome. Hallelujah. You'd have to shave off that little weld spot right there. Take the chip out. There's two of them. Okay? Literally, they are just melted plastic, part of this body, holding that chip in place. One of them has a hole, and then one of them has a slot on the chip. So you lift it off one end and slide it off. Now you had to install that Chinese chip. They had the same slot, they had the same hole, but they wouldn't fit flat. What to do? The reason they didn't fit flat, if you look at one of these chips, the back is just very, very low, little tiny chip, little tiny electronic component, but it's flat. And the compartment for this cartridge just allows just a tiny little bit of room for that chip to sit flat. The Chinese chips, single-use chips, had a little globule of resin deposited on that little tiny chip that this also has. Remember, this is only supposed to be used once and thrown away. So they don't care about any kind of damage to that chip. You use it once, it's done. You buy another cartridge. So the installation of single-use chips was basically impossible because the cartridge would not allow the chip to stay flat. It would be, that little bulge will keep it from being flat. It wasn't that much, but just enough. So that was a headache. So we had to literally manually either cut away a little bit of room. This is what I do for my PGI 29s for the Pro-1. Same thing, except that plastic can be machined. And so I'm able to machine that to allow the chips to sit flat because they're the same situation. The original chip is flat in the back. The Chinese chip has a bulge on it of black resin to seal the electronic components of the rear of the chip. So that was a pain in the So we painstakingly would modify our CLI 8s for the 9000 Mark II from Canon. That was the printer back in those days. And it would let us use the chips nice and flat. That's it. That's the only option we had. Then came Red Setter Company, and they figured out a way to create a resetter that would actually work. There were resetters for the CLI 8 cartridges, but not for the Pro 100 cartridges. Okay, so Pro 100 chips apparently use the same coating for certain colors, but not the gray colors. Okay, and I think not the black either. So we couldn't reset all of the Pro 100 cartridges, only some of them. And so we had to come up with a way to be able to have a complete set with chips that were either reset or single use. So the Chinese made some single use chips for those colors that could not be reset with the existing CLI 8 resetter. It got very confusing. Red Setter stepped in and made a resetter that works for all 8 Pro 100 cartridges. All right. So right now we are at the point where we can very easily, if you are skillful with your hands, you can modify these cartridges for refilling. And of course, if you choose to flush them, and you must flush the yellow one, as we discussed in the previous video, you can do this yourself. It just takes a long time, and you cannot afford to have that printhead sitting there without a cartridge on it. So if you choose to go that route, you have to wait until you have collected at least 2 sets of cartridges. So there's always a cartridge in that printhead while you are performing your modification operation and flushing and drying and that sort of thing on the other matching color cartridge. Yeah. So refilling these needle, basically we will use one of these that's perfectly modified, CLI-42 yellow. I did this for myself. The drilling is perfect. The plug fits perfectly. We're going to apply one of these great clips onto it. And I like to use bottles. Okay. That allows me to simply take off this scabbard. I use an alcohol pad and I clean it. And I also clean the inner surface of that hole because dye inks are susceptible to spores, fungal spores. You don't want to push it. Okay. You want to keep a very clean environment. Boom. Insert and fill. Let it permeate into the sponge. This level will drop. Top it off slowly. Take your time until you reach a point where it's about 1/8 of an inch from the top and your sponge has been fully saturated. You plug it and you have a perfectly refilled cartridge. If you have air pockets, then it's not going to permeate through the sponge. That probably means that you have some moisture left in some areas. If you see not air pockets, but white areas where the ink has not permeated through the sponge fibers, you probably have moisture in there. It's going to take a while for it to, just kind of assimilate itself. Now, once you refill, there's a test that you must perform because you don't want to put this cartridge into your printer. It'll be reset, it'll be refilled, but now you have to test it for ink flow. So you're going to remove this. 2 things you're going to test: how well this plug is sealing and how well the cartridge is actually flowing. So you're going to remove that clip and you're going to hold this over a cup. Otherwise, your wife, your husband is going to get very upset with you. Okay, hold it over a cup. You don't mind getting dirty, and you maybe will get 1 drop and then it will stop. No dripping whatsoever. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the plug. Now it will begin to drip continually, about 1.5 drips a second, something like that. A little bit more, a little bit less. As long as you have a steady drip. And you will see the levels on the liquid chamber begin to drop. Plug it again. Wear gloves, okay? This can be messy. Plug it again, and you will see that the plug emerges past that seat that you drilled out, and it will stop. Okay? This is good to go. Put that clip back on. remove the plug, and top it back up. Okay? 1/8 of an inch from the top. Boom. Remember, you wasted some ink as you were performing that drip test. And there you are. Perfectly refilled cartridge. Now, let me give you one other situation here. And I think this is the way the factory does it. Some people think that the ink is injected where that ball resided. I think it's not the case that way. I think that's not the case. I don't know exactly what the function of that factory ball is, but I think this is the way that they do it. So let's assume, let me see if I can find one here that's unused. Okay, this one is unused. So they have a machine. Oh, by the way, the vent paper will be there. That little strip that you remove when you first use your cartridge will be installed. So this whole top portion, including the serpentine vent, will be totally sealed and air cannot get in or out. Okay, so that'll be a condition that you must have. So you take one of your already used up cartridges, you take some aluminum tape and you seal that again. Make sure you do that. And you lay it upside down like that. Now, here's what they would do. They have a press that would actually press against this, the port. And that press had an ink injector in it. And they would then create a vacuum, which would then basically suck in the walls of the cartridges a little bit, create a strong vacuum inside. The vacuum would then be released and ink would be allowed to enter. Because there's no way you can force ink in there. There's no way for the air that resides inside the cartridge to escape because everything is sealed. So you create a vacuum, the machine will do that, and then when the vacuum is released, ink can flow in. And this is repeated until the whole liquid chamber is full and the sponge has been basically reversed filled. Okay? That's what's happening. And I think they do it this way. Okay? I did it this way just to show you what would be happening, but I think it is done this way. And the ink enters through the sponge and of course also refills the liquid chamber. So how can you do that yourself? So why am I even bringing this up? Well, you could refill these basically without modifying them. Okay? No drilling, no removal of any ball, nothing. You buy one of these clips and you create a little adapter. Simply what I did was I measured the diameter of one of my needles. You're going to need a Dremel tool. Get a drill size that matches that and drill a hole through this port right here. Okay? And when it emerges past that, you're going to then take a needle, stick it in, measure hold on, measure how long the needle has to be so that it just barely protrudes past this gasket right here, the sealing gasket. Okay, so it's probably going to be like 1/8 of an inch long. You take a cutting wheel on your Dremel and you cut that needle stubby. It's going to be a needle just like this, but only like yay long. Okay, about that long. You're going to take that needle and insert it through the hole you just drilled. You're going to buy some gel CA, cyanoacrylate crazy glue. Go to a hobby shop, a good hobby shop, and buy some cyanoacrylate activator. Okay? That's critical. You're going to insert the needle in there. You're going to start creating a layer of glue around it. It's gel, so it's going to stay put, and spray with the activator. That's going to harden it immediately. And build up that layer until you get this. It's a bit of work, but this will then serve as a filling and flushing tool. So this being an untampered CLI-42 cartridge, and let's just assume that I just emptied it, so it's still wet. I'm going to go ahead and refill it. For that, I'm going to require a large syringe. So we're going to need something like where's my syringe? Right here. something like a 60 milliliter syringe. I mean, yeah, that big. You're going to load about 14 ml of ink of the color that you require. So let's assume that this little bit is 14. Okay. You're going to create a vacuum. And then when you create that vacuum, it will draw. You got to create a real strong vacuum. It will draw that. See, I don't have this sealed up here. See? So I have to make sure that I seal that with tape. You're going to draw back, create a vacuum, and that will suck ink in to the sponge. You can do that this way. Draw back and ink will go in. Draw back and ink will go in until you have no more ink, because you only loaded about as much as you can actually inject in your cartridge. That will fill your cartridge. I'm going to perform this on video in a future video, because I got to wait for some 60 ml syringes to arrive. But I'm going to show you how to perform this. Now, I think Octo Ink from the UK has these clips already made for you. So you can perform the refilling of your OEM cartridges the way the factory did it. And now you can do that simply with this adapter. You just need a large syringe, because the amount of vacuum you need to create is quite large, okay, for this to work correctly. All right. Interesting, isn't it? Yes. So it's quite a history. And right now, refilling is easy. You have to do it consistently. The thing to keep in mind, I'll use this as an example. This is already refilled once. And at this point, this would be like the perfect time to refill these, okay? I could do all 8 of them in a matter of a couple of minutes. Reset the chip, top off, plug, put back into the printer. Notice what's happening here, right? It's saturated. This sponge is in perfect saturation mode. Notice what's happening here. You see that the top is, lacking ink. Of course it's dried, but even if it was just declared empty, the bottom of the sponge already has air in it. The top of the sponge has a ton of air in it. Ink will probably not permeate that sponge very easily. Okay, it might take a lot of attempts. So the idea is to always top off. I don't use the word refill. Top off your CLI-42 cartridges when they are either immediately low or just before that low warning. That low warning means you have no ink here anymore. Okay, low warning means that you're just now living on the whatever ink is left in the sponge. You never want to drop the saturation level of that sponge. That is key. That is key. That is the key condition you have to meet when you refill. Never let this sponge become like that, okay? Because ink is not going to go in. It's not going to replenish that sponge. There's too much air in the way, okay? So you must do it when it is in this condition. And that means you have a little bit of ink left in the liquid chamber. That means that sponge is still being fed. You see what I'm saying? The sponge is still being fed. It's still being kept at a saturation level that is primo, okay? Once this goes empty and you want to squeeze in another print, that's it. You just ruined the situation. Okay? So don't do that before they reach empty. In fact, like I said in my previous video, at this condition, I would rip out all the cartridges and put a second set of cartridges already refilled. Boom. Then I can take my time and take care of these. And the other ones will still be at all kinds of different levels. And I can easily just refill those at my leisure, taking my time. And you got to be careful when you refill. You don't make mistakes by mixing colors, especially the photo magenta, and photo cyan, and grays. You could mix those up if you're not careful. And that will drive you nuts, guaranteed. All right. Thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate all the support you guys have given the channel. It's been really great this month and the previous month. Views are going up. I really am giddy about it. I was thinking about slowing down, maybe taking a long break, but now I'm all re-energized again. So Thank you guys so much for all of the support. Again, don't miss my Sunday evening live streams. I say evening is 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. We talk a lot of stuff, and I'm going to be experimenting with different ways of broadcasting. I'm going to allow people with other cameras, let's say webcams and microphones, to join a panel, so to speak. And that way it'll just not be me, it'll be me and others that can maybe interact with each other directly. Okay, that'll be a lot of fun. But I got to experiment on that. I'm going to probably be doing a live stream sometime this week. Again, I always say that, but I never get a chance to do it. But finally, I have an evening free. So I'm going to go ahead and do that possibly this coming Thursday night. So be aware of that. Again, if you guys have a webcam on your computer, whether it's mounted on your monitor or whatever, and a microphone so that I can at least hear you, join us. And I will provide you with a link so that you can join the stream. All right? Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and like. As always, happy printing, everybody. Bye-bye.